in Baku. We here in the Böll Foundation have the privilege to count on a very close network of CSOs and NGOs who work independently, journalists who are independent and work in the region. This is done with the help of our offices in Tbilisi and then the office in Yerevan in Armenia. And we use those contacts in order to get new information and to help influence our policymakers here in Berlin and in Brussels when it comes to new developments in the region. And these days, we have convened a group of partners of the countries in order to have some internal working groups and reflections on the situation in the region, as well as public debates like this one tonight. So tonight we would like to talk about the democratic freedoms, about the civil space, the shrinking spaces, and the role that the international relations play. After that, we would like to ask the question why Germany and the EU does have a hard time with the region between sporadic commitments and then just business making, and sometimes we try to be their teachers, or on the other hand, just being ignorant and staying passive. So what would a consequent strategy towards these three countries have to look like? And then last but not least, the question, in the current geopolitical situation, how can we perceive what does the situation for peace and stability look like? And this is going to be our framework tonight. And I'm delighted to have three guests here from Georgia and Armenia. We have with us Sofo Verzioli. She is head and member of the analysis platform Commentari that has been founded just recently. It is a media platform and a discussion platform. And she is a lawyer by training. She has studied constitutional law and has worked in different positions and has worked on the legal reform. In quite some time, she has worked in a partner organization of the Böll Foundation, the Social Justice Center. Thank you so much for being with us. Then we have a guest from Yerevan. This is Andranik Shirinyan. He is now the representative of Freedom House, the big international human rights-based organization. And he himself is a lawyer as well, lawyer by training with the specialization of international and European law. He has studied in Yerevan, Armenia, and in Bologna, as I could read, and he has served the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for some time. Thank you so much for being with us, Andranik. And then, originally from Azerbaijan, from Baku, now in Berlin, Leyla Mustafayeva. She is the editor-in-chief of Abzas Media, which is an independent media platform, a media outlet from Azerbaijan, now in exile, unfortunately, by training. She is an English teacher, and then later she has studied journalism in Armenia. So thank you so much to you for being with us. And someone who's quite frequently with us, and therefore she does not need a lot of introduction, Viola von Kramon, still a delegate of the European Parliament. Unfortunately, for the next legislative period, she's not going to be on the board because of the quite unfortunate electoral outcome of the Green Party, but still as a member of the German Parliament and earlier as a member of the European Parliament. She was a very important supporter of Eastern European policy of the Green Party, very important voice, and for us as well, a very important ally. So we will not lose you in any function. So thank you so much, and warm welcome to you. And then to my right, Robin Wagner, who's wearing two hats tonight. He is a member of Parliament of the Green Party, and therefore one of our main voices within the Green Party for Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. And at the same time, he is a coordinator for inter-societal cooperation with the Southern Caucasus, the Republic of Moldova, and Central Asia. And this is a title that is quite difficult to come over my lips, but I'm happy to have you as well. Thank you for being with us. I would like to start out with Georgia. So earlier in those times, when I was working in Georgia myself in the 2000s, Georgia was perceived as the lighthouse of democracy with freedom of speech, freedom of press, the freest country and the locomotive of all the democratic transformation movements in the region. Now, as I have read in the Freedom House Index, it is placed behind Armenia even on the index, and we are all quite worried. So what is happening in the country? And how can we explain that evolution? So is it about maintaining the power, the private person, the most important oligarch in the country, or is it about the power of Russia that try to keep or to reinstall the power of Georgia? EU tatsächlich
by not fulfilling or refusing to take any step in response to the criticism they get for their authoritarian steps. So this is at stake. Our future is at stake. We need to act, and we see parliamentary election in October as a momentum for this action. Of course, we have critics towards political opposition as well, and we can discuss this later, but still this is momentum for Georgian society to bring back our country towards EU, and more importantly to the constitutional framework, because now our country operates beyond even our constitution. And the Georgian dream violates our constitutional principles in many regards. So yeah, that's shortly.
May I ask, how could this happen and why? Where does this come from? This turn?
Well, you mean the shift? There might be different explanations, of course. Geopolitical explanation that somehow Georgia is sending the message towards other authoritarian or totalitarian states that yes, we are here and we are adhering your principles and your lifestyle and your playbook and guidelines. And there are many questions about this kind of influence, of course. But another very strong argument is the simple wish to remain in the power. And Georgian Dream realizes that they want to remain in power for the fourth term, which has never happened in the independent Georgia. No single political party remained in the power for the first time. And GD wants to remain with constitutional majority, and they know that if they will implement systemic reforms, if they will implement those recommendations from EU Commission, they will not have chance to consolidate the power in a way they want to consolidate. So that's why they need to isolate from the EU, but not to say that we don't want Georgia to be part of the EU. Still, they say that we will be members, full members of the EU, but in a way we want to. And you will welcome us with open arms, even with our undemocratic steps and authoritarian steps. And this is a momentum when European Union and individual member states should clearly say that, no, this is a value-based organization. You will not be welcomed with an open arm with these laws, with this violence and everything that's taking place in Georgia. So I would say that both internal arguments and external influence might be, both explanations are logical, of course. We don't have like facts, very strong facts, how this influence may be working in case of Georgia, but definitely remaining in power and having consolidated power is a very clear wish, and it's enough for them to shift the course of the whole country.
Vielen Dank. Leila, jemand, der sich seine Macht ja keine Sorgen machen muss, ist Präsident Aliyev. Er hat volle politische Kontrolle. Rückintegration, wie es heißt, von Karabach in Aserbaidschan. Hat stabile Exporte von Gas und Öl. 52% der aserbaidschanischen Exporte gehen im Übrigen in die EU, bei weitem der wichtigste Handelspartner Aserbaidschans. Warum reagiert das Regime Aliyev dennoch so nervös auf Kritik? Und wie muss man sich die Situation im Land vorstellen, einige Monate vor der COP29?
Also ich denke, dass einer der Gründe darin liegt, dass er kein demokratischer Präsident ist und er das auch niemals war. Er wurde niemals gewählt durch die freie Stimme der Bevölkerung. Und auf der anderen Seite, denke ich, ist es auch ein Weg, sich selbst zu schützen, seine Macht zu sichern. Und ich denke, dass diese Kritik, die er artikuliert, hauptsächlich sich an das heimische Publikum sozusagen richtet, also nicht gegen den Westen gerichtet ist, sondern seine eigene Bevölkerung etwas zeigen soll. Es soll den 10 Millionen Menschen zeigen, ich bin machtvoll, ich habe Macht gegenüber westlichen Ländern und ich werde nicht zurückweichen angesichts der internationalen Kritik. Also ich denke, das ist einer der Gründe, den ich jetzt hier nennen könnte.
Wie ist die Situation von Medien jetzt und Zivilgesellschaft?
The situation of media.
Also die Situation der Medien ist so, im vergangenen Jahr, wenn wir uns den Medien Freedom Index angeschaut haben, dann rangierte Aserbaidschan zwischen Afghanistan und Pakistan. Und in diesem Jahr sind wir in der Nähe von Russland. Also ich kann jetzt nicht sagen, ob das jetzt besser oder nicht ist, besser oder schlechter ist, aber wir werden hier mit 3 Staaten sozusagen in der Region gleichgesetzt. Und es gab eine Welle, die im November vergangenen Jahres anfing, wo Absas Media, dessen Herausgeberin ich bin, attackiert wurde. Da wurden
Government turned all its resources to inside of the country after Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh left Nagorno-Karabakh, because they were organizing this kind of so-called protest of peace activists and eco-activists, but we also found out that actually they were not peace activists. Actually, the organization organizing this protest has been founded by the initiative of Heydar Aliyev Foundation, which vice president, wife of the president, is the president of this organization. So, and after Armenians left Nagorno-Karabakh, they turned their face inside the country, just to silence independent media, Abzas media, just who were leading investigations after this land, Nagorno-Karabakh, gained back by Azerbaijan. It was creating, Aliyev was using this, let's say, victory propaganda a lot, you know, using bad language and igniting and increasing which ethnic, let's say, hate. And the investigations published, Abzas media was publishing the investigation about reconstructions in Nagorno-Karabakh, and it was giving this idea of these investigations that actually they say that we have released Nagorno-Karabakh from Armenians, but actually this land were reoccupied by first family of Azerbaijan and their close associates, because the companies reconstruction Nagorno-Karabakh were belonging either to this family or to their close associates. So this investigation was destroying the image of Aliyev, let's say. And that's why they decided just to arrest and to make sure that this website never operates anymore. And we were just surprised, and also to see that, okay, it feels like something is going to happen, but what? And a few weeks later, Aliyev declared that he's going to snap president elections. It was the first election, like he said, organized and held in all territory of Azerbaijan. And he didn't want this website continues criticizing it. And another media outlet also was shut down, and the journalists were detained just before this COP29. And just a few months ago, election experts were detained under smuggling charges. And it was already the announcement of that, okay, they're going to the next elections, parliament elections, and that's why they don't want the elections to be properly observed. That is what happened just in last 6 months in Azerbaijan. But I think that it is not possible to talk about, very difficult to talk about peace if just one side is inclined a lot. In this situation, as a journalist, my observation is that Pashinyan looks more peace-oriented, rather than Aliyev. Because the president who wants to have a peace should not use this threatening language and look forward to sort out this problem in order the next generations live peacefully. I have lived and studied in Georgia. Actually, we were calling Georgia the Europe of South Caucasus in Azerbaijan. And I have studied there, I have lived there. We never had chance to visit Armenia because of the conflict, let's say isolated from each other. But to have a peace in the region, all sides has to talk the same language, I think.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. This still sounds like a very faraway dream, but a very beautiful dream. Anthony, in Yerevan, we've seen footage of protests also in front of the parliament that were met with a lot of police violence and also dispersed with police violence. What was the reasons for these protests, and how did Freedom House assess the police violence? This is the one question. So what was basically the root cause for these protests, and how did the police deal with them? And what's the assessment of the domestic policy situation with regard to institutions, democratic reforms? Are you making progress in this regard?
Thank you. Thank you, Walter. Hi, everyone. Before proceeding to answer the question, I just want all of us to recognize this moment and how beautiful it is that we are able to gather here. And though each of us has their grievances, just being here and being able to talk with each other, I think in itself it's a beautiful thing, and it's a victory. And thank you a lot for being part of it and organizing it. Thank you. Armenia I think each of our countries is a difficult case. Back in 2018, I have a long background in activism. That's something that is not mentioned in my CV, but that's a huge part of it and a huge part of my personality as well. And in 2018, when the revolution in Armenia happened, it wasn't a pro-European revolution per se. There was no geopolitical component involved in it. But for the Armenians and for all of us that were involved in the protest movements, it was a conscious choice of democratic values. And I wouldn't say that we as Armenians have a unified understanding what democracy means, but I think it was, for all of us, it was freedom of expression, it was fight against corruption, it was justice and fairness. And unfortunately, we did understand the hard way that without security, we will not be able to have democratic development, meaningful reform processes in the country. And the efforts of the Armenian government and the efforts of the civil society were, unfortunately, we did stumble upon the Nagorno-Karabakh war in 2020, which was, I think it's a huge trauma for all of us in the region. And it's still a very difficult topic to talk about. And Armenia is it's a transitional democracy. You mentioned Freedom House, and according to Freedom House's reports, we are a partly free country, we are a transitional democracy, and it's a difficult context and difficult environment to work in and to work towards reforms, exactly because of the reasons that my colleague from Azerbaijan mentioned, because when you don't have security, the meaningful reform processes will not be able to be implemented. We have a lot of progress in some areas, and we have some backward steps in others. I think the freedom of expression is one of the biggest achievements that we had in the country since 2018. We have free media. This doesn't necessarily mean pluralism, unfortunately, because after the revolution, there are still these economic benefits, the oligarchic benefits that are involved in the media work, and some of the medias, or the majority of the medias, are owned by the rich, who sometimes represent the previous regime, and they have the ability to control the narrative, and this is the most dangerous part. When you control the narrative and you don't believe in democracy, the first thing that you will attack are the democratic institutions. And the free media was attacked, the civil society was attacked, and this has resulted in even physical attacks towards the civil society organizations and media. After 2020 war, when the ceasefire statement was signed, the people who went out to the streets, the first thing that they attacked, the first buildings, were the buildings of the Open Society Foundation and Radio Liberty. So this shows how the narratives were controlled and continue to be controlled in Armenia. And this brings me to the point that I want to mention the important support towards this democratic development and towards meaningful reform processes in Armenia. You mentioned the police violence. This is a huge issue in Armenia, systematic one. I think there is a systematic issue of police violence in a country that has a history of undemocratic history for the past 3 decades. And of course, these reforms don't happen overnight. We have been paying huge attention towards the police reforms and the police brutality. Though the question was asked in the context of the protests, but I want to speak about how about the police brutality specifically towards the marginalized communities. When last year an LGBT-friendly club was attacked by the police under the guise of searching for drugs, and the attendees of the club, who were mostly queer people, were targeted, were attacked, were physically attacked, and also harassed in the police stations. And this and a couple of other things resulted in the club closing down probably a couple of months ago. So we have this systematic issue of police violence. The protest movement that started, if I'm not mistaken, 2 months ago, it is led by an archbishop of Tavush region in Armenia. This is a very unique situation, right? I don't think I'm too young, but I haven't seen anything like this in my lifetime. And Armenia is a secular country. There is this clear division between state and the church. However, there was the protest started, and the archbishop was leading the protest. What led to the protest was the demarcation and delimitation process with Azerbaijan, and this process was happening by the 4 villages in Tavush region. and some areas near these villages were to be handed over to Azerbaijan. Of course, people living in those villages were not happy because their livelihood would be affected by this, and I want to recognize there is this legitimate concern because there is no meaningful discussion and meaningful reconciliation efforts between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So though this whole movement started from this delimitation and demarcation process, when it reached to Yerevan, it turned into demand of resignation of the Prime Minister. The first day of the protest movement, there were a lot of people in the Republic Square. However, over time, this number got smaller and smaller, and the day that you are speaking about, by the accounts of independent civil society organizations, there were 3,500 people that were demanding the resignation of the Prime Minister and were trying to enter the Parliament building. And eventually the police used excessive force towards the protesters, and a lot of civil society organizations in Armenia spoke up against the police violence. And I think this should be spoken about, and there should be reforms in the police forces. However, another aspect that should be talking about is, in general, these movements that are happening in Armenia over and over every year, and in some cases the speeches that they use, the way that they address the public, the civil society organizations, and the democratic institutions sometimes do not fit in our understanding of democracy and democratic movements and peaceful protests. So there's this side of the story as well in Armenia that we're grappling with, and it's a very complex situation. We have elections in 2026, and Armenia is in an electoral democracy. We're at that point in our democratic development, and I think in such type of context, the change of power should be solved through democratic, fair and free elections. And I don't see any other way at this point for a change in the government. I don't think there is a demand among the Armenian society for a change of in the government. At least this is what shows also the movements that are happening in the country.
Ja, ganz. Sorry? Okay, later. Viola und Robin.
Viola and Robin, to you two.
Ja, vor allen Dingen Thema. Ja?
The EU is one of the main issues in this regard, and lately the EU has voiced the claim, and as well driven by the war of aggression in Ukraine, to become a more active geopolitical actor. And the Southern Caucasus seems to be one of the test regions for it. So Viola, this region that you see from very close by in the last years, do you think that this region is ready for it to become a geopolitical actor? And how would it have to act? So you are insinuating that it is not. I think we have made many, many mistakes in the last 5 years, especially in the beginning of the war. And I think in November 2020, the EU has, unfortunately, yes, we know it has been the pandemic and no airplanes could fly over. But many Armenians asked me when we were expressing our solidarity with Ukraine, with a lot of financial resources and in-kind resources, they were saying there was a war here on our soil and you weren't there and you didn't care. And I do think that this past chance has cost the EU a lot of credibility. Now I think we have made up part of it, and the expression that the EU sees itself as a geopolitical commission that is basically the right claim, and I do share it, and I think we should live it a lot more in the political arena. But the main fault that has been made by Ms. von der Leyen to give this very important position to an Hungarian to talk about the neighbor policy is a contradiction in itself, because Mr. Oliver Haley is not necessarily the person that feels close to democratic values and the democratic reforms that we do share and that we want to see for your countries. So he's not the right person to implement it. So to the contrary, he goes to Georgia and he applauds the Georgian government for what they have done. And I was in favor, but he did favor that Georgia was becoming a candidate out of other reasons. And now in the Council of Foreign Ministers and at the summit, he really did cross our lines, because there was a big majority to leave the candidate status of Georgia until the elections are over, to see in what direction the country is moving. But we did have some votes against it. And one of those voices, or one of the votes, were the Hungarian vote. And in those countries where we are quite visible, good to hear. And this is something that, we have this hybrid position, and this, of course, diminishes our role. And now in Armenia, I think we have done some good. And one reason why Georgia has received the candidate status, because the Armenians, they begged us. They told us, please, if you leave Georgia behind, we will never have a chance to become members of the EU. So please do not forget Georgia. Although right now, according to the criteria that you have stipulated, are not at all in a position to be a candidate. And I think it is very important that internally we have really fought for it and have done some convincement work in order to take up Georgia for Armenia. And Walter, you said so. This is we have had a shift in the foreign policy. They want to get away from the Russian occupation, from the Russian grip, and for that they need the EU as a reliable partner, as a reliable mediator. But they do need some economic leeway, and this is only possible if we let them do that. So getting closer to the EU is only possible via Georgia. We need the connectivity, the connection in terms of energy, in terms of digitalization and trade, and all that is impossible without Georgia. And I think in the case of Armenia, it will work out well. Now, talking about Azerbaijan, this is basically a race to the bottom. So it's really bitter to see where we are at when we talk about human rights, but as well when it comes to stability and security and the will to have peace with its neighbors. And there, I do think the EU makes a significant mistake. I think we should have a very hard stance on it, although we do need the gas, that we have to live up to the expectations and to keep to the rules that we have established at some point. And it seems that they do not apply for Azerbaijan. And internally, I was trying to get sanctions through for Ivanishvili, and that we can sanction people who have been on the press against the agent. And what do we do in Azerbaijan? They were telling me we have a lot of political prisoners. There's no freedom whatsoever, no freedom of reunion, and nobody does anything, and no sanctions are to be imposed. But I think this cannot be the benchmark. I mean, I think everyone has left Azerbaijan aside, and this, of course, is a huge mistake. But it does not mean that we have, or that we can let things happen in Georgia, to have it come as far as it already is in Azerbaijan. I think we can already or still have an influence in Georgia. On Azerbaijan, we have to work on a totally different level, and I do not see any endeavor here in Berlin or anywhere else, any political will to do something against Aliyev. And he, of course, he purchases Russian gas and then sends it over to us. He sells it over to us. So it's not necessarily the gas coming from Azerbaijan, comes from Kazakhstan or Russia. And I think this is a huge geopolitical error that we let them do it to us.
Robin Wagner,
Robin Wagner.
Viola hat es angesprochen.
Viola has already mentioned it.
Wie ist es mit Georgien?
How about Georgia?
Situation sich weiter verschlechtern.
Should the situation exacerbate and the foreign agents law should be implemented and another legal package against LGBTQ should be adopted? How about the Georgian dream keeping on working as it is? Do you think the candidate status should be lifted? And what does a coordinator for civil society relationship that is responsible for Azerbaijan with a country that does not want to be part of the EU?
So it
has all reason to be quite self-confident. They are perceived as a very important actor in the region, closely related to Turkey. So where do we have margin of movement, or where do we have some leeway in there? I would like to start out with Georgia, because this was the first part of your question. I personally do not think that the instrument of lifting the candidate status would be the right instrument. But whenever the candidate status is acknowledged, then we do it in light of the necessary reforms. But what do I think is very essential, and the European Council has expressed it quite clearly, and other German politicians on all different levels, starting from the German Chancellor down to the coordinator and whoever you might have in mind, that it is no option whatsoever that with this foreign agents law we can continue on our path to the European Union. Then we might still keep the candidate status, but we cannot continue on the pathway. And me personally, I am quite disappointed, I have to admit. And Viola said so. She has she has tried to lobby for the candidate status, and myself, I've done the same thing. And then many civil societal actors said it's very important to receive the candidate status. And the voices from Armenia have been quite clear. You said so. And the government and the party of the Georgian dream, I think they are the ones who usually say that we need to keep on going down that road, but they are the ones who are putting the biggest obstacles in our line. So it has to be completely clear that with that law, the foreign agents law, and what is in the pipeline, the LGBTQ law, so let's wait for the two-thirds majority to be passed. But with all those plans ahead, there is no way into the European Union, and any other cooperation has to be put under examination. So we cannot keep on working the way it is. And next week I will go over to Georgia to make it clear, because I think it is put into doubt if this is a clear position of Germany, that this is clearly expressed. And I think it's very important to really talk to the actors, to those responsible on site, and to say and tell them that this is our position and we will not move away from it. And then about Azerbaijan, a very practical issue to keep up the dialogue as well with the Azerbaijan government, that it is essential for a country to have a free civil society. This is something that we have to reiterate once and again. So we have more than 300 political prisoners right now. This is a situation that is exacerbating. So this is totally unacceptable, and this is something that we have to address once and again. And now we see Azerbaijan does not want to become a member of the European Union, so it does not follow this pathway. In Georgia, we can say, okay, we cannot continue this road, but this is not something I can tell Azerbaijan because they're not even willing to join the EU. And I do think there are different standards when it comes to my expectations towards the countries. Therefore, I do expect a different human rights-based approach in Georgia because they have decided to embark on their journey. But I do expect that Azerbaijan provides freedom for its citizens. But it's very difficult to see any light in the end of the tunnel. Now, we have the situation with the COP29, some expectations related to it of how the situation could improve, but this is definitely not my observation right now, that things are improving. But I do think there cannot be any cooperation with Azerbaijan. So every single country does not share our standards. I cannot tell them that the only cooperation partners are Russia and China and there are no other options in the world. I think we have to find other ways of cooperation, but we have to underline that it is important to maintain those channels of dialogue open. People are imprisoned, and sometimes, even if it is on an individual basis, we can reach some success. You have talked about a very important issue already, that the EU that wants to become geopolitically active cannot always choose her allies. And now my question to you, to the guests from the Southern Caucasus. How is the EU perceived? Because it seemed that we still have some hope for democratic reforms, but there are other voices saying that, well, dear EU, you have this, you're really not credible anymore. You have this double standards, and you try to teach us lessons. Frau von der Leyen said they have done their homework. I mean, even the wording that she is using, are we her students? So how is the EU in the countries perceived, and how should it maybe be from your perspective? Andranik.
Thank you. So if we look at the surveys and the last ones, EU has a very high standing in the surveys. I would say probably, I won't remember the correct number, but something around 60% of Armenians believes in EU. And this is really historic because in those same surveys, Russia is perceived to be one of the biggest security threats to Armenian statehood. And this is the exact time that the EU as an institution could act, could step up and support the Armenian statehood, Armenian sovereignty more, and have a more value-based approach to the region and to Armenia. But aside from the surveys, I don't think we see this happening, unfortunately. I think we see what you already mentioned. I think we see this geopolitics at play in our region. Unfortunately, though Armenia has made a significant democratic progress, there are progress in all areas. Of course, it's difficult to change the whole systems and institutions overnight, especially when you had such things like a war, following conflicts. But even in this situation, Armenia has made significant progress, and this is manifested in many international reports. Viola has been to Armenia a couple of times, and she can also speak how the country has changed over time, and how this democratic institutions, how civil society feel comfortable to function. Our organization started working in Armenia only after the revolution, and this itself is saying. However, we do hear from the Armenian society and from the wider public about this hypocritical approach of the EU, especially from those who are standing in the highest positions. The photo of Ursula von der Leyen with President Aliyev, mentioning him as a reliable partner, was, I think, a huge blow to the EU as an institution and how Armenians perceive it, because this happened after the war, after many human rights organizations stated how Azerbaijan started the war and how this is an aggression. Even though those territories are internationally recognized as yours, it doesn't give you the right to start a war of aggression in those territories. However, we see how EU has sympathized with President Aliyev because of the economic benefits. I'm not a geopolitical expert, I'm a human rights defender, and I think the human rights should come first, and we have to take into account the rights of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, but also those that live in the regions of Armenia. Here, EU has played a crucial role, and I want to recognize the role of the EU monitoring mission in Armenia that was deployed last year. I was visiting the EUMA in Yeregnadzor, one of the regions of Armenia, 2 days ago before coming here, and we were taken to patrol one of the border villages, the Khachik village, and the villagers, their livelihood depends on the areas right at the border. These people have not been able to cultivate because of frequent shootings from the Azerbaijani side. Since the deployment of EUMA, because they have been consistently patrolling in those areas, it's more peaceful, and you can see people working in those areas. If you pay closer attention, you can see Azerbaijani positions on the other side and people cultivating on this side. It's a striking picture to see how the communities in the affected areas, in the border regions, are living in Armenia, but also in Azerbaijan. Peace, I think, is beneficial for all sides, and we have to work towards it. And the approach that European Union has said, I think, hasn't really helped that. And for communities, I don't think we can really explain what is geopolitics and how geopolitics works, and I don't even want to do that. And that has been the perception of the EU, unfortunately, because we have been advocating, this wording, European values. I personally disagree. I think those are universal values, but people frequently ask us, but what are those European values if they continue doing business with autocrats? So this is the unfortunate perception. I think as a young person myself, I've been growing up with these ideas, and it's really sad for me to see how this ideology is crushing down for people like us.
Mm-hmm. So, when have you last time been really angry on the EU or even on Germany?
Well, I would start by mentioning that, of course, a Georgian Dream tries to use some weaknesses they see in international politics and the EU itself. And the fact is that the shift in this foreign policy activated, I would say this way, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Of course, this was a momentum for GD to start shifting the course, but there are some other factors they try to use during their propaganda. First, it's of course the upcoming US election, and they bet for election of the Trump, and they assume that maybe Trump's administration would be more loyal towards their changed rhetoric, their ultra-conservative narratives, and maybe Trump will get the sense why Georgia found China as a strategic partner and stuff like that. And of course, some weaknesses of the EU itself. For instance, after the last EU election, state propaganda tried to convince Georgian people that even within the EU, far right is strengthening. Populist forces are gaining more force, and liberal democracy is no longer a matter, even for EU. And they quite often refer to Hungary's example. And we know that Russia's and Hungary's playbook is very favorite book for GD. And they refer to Hungary as an example of other more saint or good Europe, comparing to these liberal democratic countries within the EU. And of course, these weaknesses are used by the propaganda. I would say that despite these narratives, of course, European integration remains a highly supported idea among Georgian citizens, and GD did not manage to destroy this consensus among our citizens, which was the aim, I would say, of this rhetoric and narratives. But it does not mean that you should not try to be more visible for the Georgian citizens. I understand that there are some barriers and you cannot speak in one voice, and it's more complicated for you to position. Many communication, cooperation takes place behind the closed door. But I would say that Georgian citizens need to see European Union not only as a punisher or from this perspective, as they will punish GD or they will suspend visa regime or stuff like that, but they want to see European Union as a positive political project for average Georgian. And one thing I would say, and it refers to you as well as other international partners and allies. Many times their perspective is quite narrow towards Georgia. Sometimes their rhetoric does not reflect the real concerns of the Georgian people and the needs that exist on the ground. And I would refer to many social and economic problems that are somehow missed in the mainstream rhetoric of the diplomats and EU institutions. And we would like to see European Union as a progressive political project for our citizens, not as an institution who's going to punish someone for the wrongdoings, but who can help our country to decrease the inequalities we have and to help in the struggles we have in our everyday lives in terms of social and economic problems as well. So the visibility of the EU and positive visibility should increase, I would say, in Georgia.
So eine sehr höfliche Art, meine Frage zu.
So this is quite a polite form of answering my question. So Viola, I know that you are very mad with the EU many times. Well, to come back to Georgia, I just wanted to say that, well, after my last discussions with the European Foreign Office, they've understood that we now have the opportunity as an EU to communicate in a way. I mean, it's not about social benefits or social improvements, but it is actually about, ahead of the election, to say, if you decide in favor of Europe, if you are still, and in the past it was 85%, if you're still in favor of the EU, if you're still in favor of NATO, if you still want that, then you have to elect parties that pave that way. And if we manage to spread this communication, then of course I think we would have won a lot. Of course, we cannot immediately interfere. I mean, we cannot take sides either. But of course, we can support those parties and those social groups and those partners who are representing these European values, whatever you understand under European values, but who have the same ideas of democracy. And of course, we do see this in the EU as well. We have the social labor market and all the other standards. They are not the priority at the EU level, but it is quite clear those who want to become a member of the EU have to make sure that they have labor standards, social standards, and all the other standards. So all this applies, of course, also to the individual citizens, or is also visible for the individual citizens. But simply to say EU means that inequality within a country can be overcome. This is unrealistic. This is also not the project of the EU, at least not at the moment. Maybe we come there one day. But this means that we have to create different incentives to show the people that, okay, your life is getting better, but it will not become better immediately when we start with the negotiation. So this will be a very long process. So before I open up our discussion for questions from the audience, one question to Leila. Well, the COP29, what kind of expectations do you have with regard to the international, also especially Germany, the international community in Germany? this would be an opportunity to improve things in Azerbaijan, maybe?
The Azerbaijanis has only one idea about this COP29. You know, for these countries like Azerbaijan, for these people, it is a bit luxury topic, because when there is no freedoms, when there is no well-being or making living good, and this climate issues is one of the last topics, frankly speaking, in communities like in Azerbaijan. And I think that right now, Aliyev, Baku is going to host COP29 this year, and I think that it is a huge opportunity for Aliyev to greenwash his image, which is destroyed worldwide. And there is no other explanation for that. And I have also a few notes about what the panelists talked. About this Tavush, I have grown up in this neighborhood, in this bordering village, and I have myself experienced the war. And I have seen how the shells are flying. Even one of them just destroyed the home of my aunt, but fortunately they stayed alive, could hide themselves in the basement. On those years, I remember that these IDPs that were obliged to leave Nagorno-Karabakh with brutality, with massacre, they had also the same feeling that the people in Tavush region that you were mentioning right now. On those years, even the number of IDPs in Azerbaijan was at least 6 times more than those Armenians who left Nagorno-Karabakh. I am not going to a deep argument, but I can just say just one word in this situation, that in economies like Azerbaijan and Armenia, the people are mostly invest in immovable property, which is their house first. And I can imagine, just imagine that what does it mean to leave whatever you have there and live. We really deeply understand it. And I hope that there will be a progress if this understanding will be mutual. And about the EU relations, let me just point one thing, that in recent years, the number of political prisoners has raised a lot, even more than 300 in last decades. And I also remember that how the peace activists were silenced, interrogated, threatened when they were talking about peace publicly in social media. EU political, they know Azerbaijan. They know this government. In Georgia and in Azerbaijan, there have been change of power, but in Azerbaijan, no. The same family controls the country since the Soviet times. Only just 1 year we could enjoy this independence, without them. And now, imagine that Azerbaijan opposition holds the last sanctioned protest rally in 2019. They don't let them to organize this protest, saying that people having a right to arrest. But when it comes to F1 and different international events like COP29, they can close the roads and violate the right of the rest to the people. And another issue that Azerbaijan's credentials suspended this year in Council of Europe. But I also know that it was a decision of PASI. And I know that the Committee of Ministers, they have different idea. And if you just think that Azerbaijan government, they are very useful for EU countries. It's not only about gas or Ukrainian-Russian war, the recent situation. in 2019, for instance, I said that opposition had their last rally on them. The idea of the attitude of EU didn't change to Azerbaijan as well. Those years there were no war between Ukraine and Russia. And also the embassies, EU embassies in Azerbaijan, they have lost their profiles. They don't represent their countries properly in our country. You know, they keep silence, moving their head down, and that's it. I think that this is a key issue that we have to think about. And the change, the policy of EU towards Azerbaijan, actually government completely.
Vielen Dank. Das ist eine Botschaft.
Thank you very much. This is also a message to Robin and a message that he can take along to the German to the European Foreign Office. Now I'd like to invite you to ask questions. I see Maas. We do need a microphone now.
Eckhard
Maas, German Caucasian Society. My Georgian friends are really looking forward to the elections in Georgia. So one question to Viola and also Sofo. Is there a chance that these elections will be fair and just? Will there be people who can monitor the elections from the EU? Will they be invited? And what can we do to support these elections? I'm an activist from the GDR, and I know what kind of role the rigging of elections played in the GDR. So can we give some advice to the young people in Georgia how they can control or monitor the elections? So I could also envision the foundation to do that. Are there any further questions? So I would like to collect a few. If this is not the case, there is another question in the back. Okay. Just a brief question. Please introduce yourself briefly. A brief question to the Armenian colleague. My name is Helmut Töpper. I'm a private citizen. I was astonished that Pashinyan, survived the catastrophe of Nagorno-Karabakh. And I am wondering how much suffering can the Armenian population endure? And another thing is, what's the relationship towards Turkey and Iran from your point of view?
Gut,
Okay. I assume that Andrei can answer it in 2 minutes. It's an easy question. I would like to collect another one because we are running out of time. Is there another question? Okay, over there. My name is Nora Erdmann, and I would like to know how Azerbaijan justifies that so many cultural goods in Alsaf are being destroyed. I mean, there is a recent report that was published on the destruction of, well, a world cultural heritage of Armenian churches, for example.
Gut, dann Sopo,
Very well. So, Sopo, maybe you start out with the Georgian elections. How can we control that those are fair elections? How can we make sure that they're fair? And what are the perspectives for a change of power?
Well, as I said, this is a momentum for Georgian society to bring the country back on track. But it does not mean that there are no barriers to use this momentum. First of all, and to respond to the question about the fairness, we cannot imagine a fair election when the law is in operation. I mean the law on foreign agents. And this is one of the first challenges. The law will be in full effect since September, and it will affect several civil society organizations, including the election monitoring organizations, and I cannot predict their operations since September. This means that the fairness is already undermined. Of course, there are other challenges as well, and media environment and state propaganda is another thing which is aimed to brainwash the brainwashing and poisoning the minds of the people is another challenge. And of course, the weaknesses the political opposition has. All these three together will affect the general election environment. But as for the fairness, I would say that it is already visible that we will not have fair and competitive election. But it does not mean that we will not fight for this momentum. I would say that from this perspective, the best scenario for Georgia is a fragmented power in the parliament, so not have a single party with a majority. This would be the best scenario for Georgian democracy, taking into account the concerns we have towards GD and towards the opposition parties. And the coalition government would be the best way out from this scenario. Of course, international community should play its role. And I get sometimes this message that we will wait for the election and we will see how Georgian people will defend their pro-European choice through the election. But I would say that taking into account that election monitoring NGOs might not be operational during the pre-election period, it is more important now that everyone should do what they can do before the election as well, and not to wait the election results itself. Yeah.
Na, vielleicht ganz kurz nur dazu. Also zum einen
Well, yes, maybe just briefly on that. The U.S. Senate
zusätzliche lange Wahlbeobachtungsmission
has issued and approved a special electoral monitoring unit in order to mitigate for what we cannot do from the EU. So there is an mission that has a certain methodology, and according to this regime, or according to this scheme, they enter 2 months ahead with a core team. Then they have the media analysts, and with long-term observers, they enter the country. So they do have quite a comprehensive approach. But what you hear and what your Georgian friends tell you is that outside of the big cities, the pressure where the official employed, the teachers, the doctors, they have such a huge pressure. They are now going out with those small criminal groups in order to pressure those public and official servants. So they make up lists. They look through those lists, and then on the day of the election, they pick up the telephone. And then we have chats, and with the help of those chats, they ask people if they have gone to the electoral office already. So it's going to be extremely difficult. And I have been an electoral observer twice in Georgia. You can see that monies or funds are paid out. And then the first two sentences, it is said it is not fair, free and transparent, whatever it is, but for the electoral outcome, it does not make a difference. And it really depends on us being able to support the Georgians, and that the Georgians themselves are brave enough to vote other parties despite the pressure. So there's going to be a monitoring mission and a mission from the European Parliament, but I think it's not going to be enough. People have to be strong. So, Nick, why do you think that Pashinyan does survive Nagorno-Karabakh? How can that be possible? And the second question was according to the relationship to Iran and Turkey. So maybe you can keep it brief because this is such a huge issue.
Thank you. So, how the Prime Minister survived the fall of Nagorno-Karabakh, let's say, I think there are two answers to this question, and the first one, I would say there's a growing understanding among the Armenian population about the reasons of the conflict and about the reasons why the security institutions that Armenia relied on for 3 decades didn't work. And by saying the security institutions, I mean Russia, I mean the CSTO that Armenia recently froze its membership in. amongst the Armenians there is the understanding that the Nagorno-Karabakh war was initiated in collaboration and in close consultation with Russia. And recently there were the secret documents that were leaked that showed how another CSTO member country, Belarus, has been selling huge number of weaponry to Azerbaijan starting from 2018, but Russia itself has been selling modern weaponry to Azerbaijan starting from 2012. While this information was not really shared with Armenians, I think after the war and after the government realized that we were just abandoned by our security partners, people started speaking more about this. And there was the realization that the reason of the fall of Nagorno-Karabakh is not the personality of Pashinyan per se, but there were a lot of factors at play, and the biggest one was that we relied on a hegemon. We are speaking a lot about hegemons today. How we relied on a hegemon and how difficult and how wrong it is to not to diversify your relations and to depend on one entity only. And especially if that entity is an autocratic country like Russia that has time and again proven that it cannot be a reliable partner or a reliable security guarantor. But another aspect of why Pashinyan survived, I think because after the elections, after the war, the government organized snap elections because there were rounds of protests in Armenia against Prime Minister, against Pashinyan. And the choice was between the Civil Contract Party led by Pashinyan and the Armenia Alliance, which was led by the second president of Armenia, Robert Kocharian. And for Armenians, Robert Kocharian is probably the single individual in the Armenian history that probably Armenians wouldn't ever want them back, because during their rule, in 2008, March 1st happened when 10 Armenians were killed, 10 Armenian protesters were killed after the elections because they were expressing their discontent with the election results, and the elections were obviously rigged. So when there is this dichotomy between democracy and autocratic regimes, Armenians, I think, in 2018, we expressed that we don't want to go back to an autocratic rule, that democracy is an important value for us. I think these are some of the reasons. I'm sure the sociologists will study this for a very long time, and we will find out some other societal topics that came into play, but I think these are the two major ones. The relationship with Turkey is another difficult topic because of how complex is this relationship historically has been, because of the denialism of the Armenian genocide and the continuation of it. However, there are normalization talks with Turkey, and there was an agreement, especially after the Nagorno-Karabakh war and the fall of the region, these talks intensified. And there was an agreement to open the border, which is closed unilaterally by Turkey starting from the beginning of the 90s, to open the border for the third country citizens. And on Armenian side, this willingness has been expressed time and again, but Turkey has stopped these talks basically, and the border remains closed, and these promises are not being kept. Hopefully the border will be opened. With Iran, I think the relationship is, again, like very multi-layered. With Iran, Armenia has a very deep historical relationship that goes back to like thousands of years. There is an Armenian community in Iran, a big Armenian community, and a huge Armenian historical heritage in Iran. So for us, Iran is not only a geopolitical player, but we look at Iran with this perspective of an actor, of a country that has been near us for thousands of years, that has a huge Armenian community, and this is probably the way that the government also sees Iran. We try to stay neutral with Iran. We realize that there are a lot of issues globally with Iran. However, there are a lot of things that are at play, and one of those is that Armenia has 4 borders. 2 of those are closed, Turkey and Azerbaijan, and the only way out is Georgia and the short border with Iran. So this is the context of the relationship with these countries.
Vielen Dank. Letzte Frage an Leila.
Thank you so much. A last question to Leila. This very painful issue of the destruction of cultural heritage is not something that we have only seen recently. It has accompanied the conflict as long as it had been going on. Do you know anything about what happened in Nagorno-Karabakh since the
Exodus der Vertreibung der Armenier aus der Region?
Reconquistation in terms of the culture and the cultural heritage?
Unfortunately, I won't be able to give much information about it because our website, like journalists, focused mainly on corruption investigations. Whatever I say could be manipulative, but as a journalist, I will just share my observations about this cultural heritage. To raise hand on cultural heritage is very brutal. They are not human. They are stones, but very valuable. And I have also observed that before, when I worked for a fact-checking project from Azerbaijan, I also noticed photos, after this war, how mosques were destroyed in the area of Nagorno-Karabakh, and there was also swines inside shrine. Azerbaijan is a secular country, but the religion is Islam, and you understand what does it mean to see a swine in a mosque. And it is a topic like that. Both sides can bring a lot of argumentation, saying that you have done, and this side has done, and this one as well. And let me just point one issue, that how you raise your voice here for cultural heritage of Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. And this voice wasn't raised from EU when the human rights were violated in Azerbaijan. And that's why I think that in this inequality, you have to keep your expectation very low on this topic. The persons, the president or the government which don't respect fundamental human rights, they won't respect cultural heritage as well. That's why you have to, unfortunately, you have to keep your expectations very low on this topic.
Dankeschön für diese sehr nüchterne.
Thank you so much for this very sober assessment, Robin. Both of us will go to Tbilisi and we'll meet again at another conference that is organized by the Böll Foundation. What are your expectations or your emotions when you fly over to Tbilisi? What are your impressions? What do you think could happen in the close future? So first of all, I think tonight has been a confirmation once again that the approach one size fits all with the Eastern Partnership, that I didn't if it ever worked, but my assessment is that it does not work anymore, definitely. So it needs revisiting, because we are dealing with 3 different countries that have a totally different dynamic and need different solutions different responses. In Georgia, the arms of the European Union are open for the Georgian society if they are willing to be part of it, and then it is up to the people to make their choice. So we have to see to the fact that we have fair elections, but this is the clear task. Without any political change, this is not going to happen. So this is a huge task for the civil society. To Armenia, a clear decision of a government that is quite brave in the geopolitical situation, a clear decision away from Russia, to turn away from Russia and move towards the EU. But we have to respond this decision, which has been quite a bold, quite a brave decision. So we have to give every possible support for the democratic Armenia in that sense. And then once again, reforms in the country have to be pushed forward, and it once again depends on the people in the country, of a strong civil society. And then I move to Azerbaijan. It's once again about raising their voices against the suppression of people in the country, and to see what kind of cooperation is even possible with that country and what is not permissible. So what are the right standards when we work with Azerbaijan? So all the three countries are countries that are of essential importance to collaborate. So because of geostrategic interests, and it's in the economic interest of the EU to cooperate, but this has to be confirmed that the EU remains being a community of values, and this holds true for Georgia and Armenia, supporting the democratic decisions that have been taken or are taken already. Thank you so much for this assessment. I think we can leave it here. We have surpassed our 1.5 hours already, so I think it has been quite a sober debate about a region, about three very different countries in a very different situation, but all very complex and difficult, and with a lot of uncertainty when we look towards the future. But I can tell you that yesterday and today I was moving in the circle of my colleagues here from the regions and from the region and others that are here in the room, that I at least had the feeling that the future could be that we have different impressions, where there's a lot of optimism, because I know that those are the people who live in the region, who work in the region, and the great ideas they have. And they have brought over and they will take home. And to have a very open, transparent and frank debate. I thank you all for your attention, your interest to be here tonight. Please stay loyal and see you next time. And thank you so much.